How did things get so messed up? Seriously, it feels so precarious, and I can think of other times where it felt like that. You go back to 9/11, we had some tension in our world, but this feels worse. In 9/11, you were frightened if you took a flight with COVID-19. There's trauma going to the restroom in Safeway. I recognize that the virus has no intent in it, but it feels arduous and difficult that it has come at a time when there are so many other grim things in our lives. What grim things do you say? The revelation of the staying power of racism in America that instigated Black Lives Matter, the protests, the conflict between the protests and law enforcement, the violence. Black Lives Matter has also revealed the damage done by wealth inequality. This is very messed up. Some people don't have a lot of money, but most Americans can't pay for a $400 hospital bill. Parts of our world remain aggressively homophobic. This past week, the right-wing leader of Poland was reelected. He spent most of his time campaigning with seasoning his words with homophobia. This also has exposed the divide in our country. I've seen times where elections were divisive. I remember Nixon and McGovern in 72, or Reagan and Carter in 80, and then Gore and Bush in 2000, but this feels different. Seriously, if you spend a little time like I do waltzing between the other media channels and Fox, you will see that they are in totally different worlds. And again, there is little pretense given to being balanced at all. There's Me Too. Trump is still president. And as I alluded to last week, we never should forget climate change, which eventually may wipe over everything. How did it get so messed up? It feels like the return of the Sith. These are kind of some of the thoughts that were on my mind when I turned to the lectionary text, which is the text of the weeds, the parable of the weeds in Matthew, and I read through it and I said, that's it! What a timely passage. This is just what I've needed. It's becoming clear now. The wheat is good. The weeds are evil. They grow together during life, but at the end they are justly separated and the weeds are burned. It becomes crystal clear now. We know now who the weeds are, and they will burn. Disney was right. I have to admit, recently I have been tempted by this sort of thinking because it seems to me that some people are absolutely evil. Donald Trump, Jeffrey Epstein. I also say Stephen Miller. I've heard myself say many times, there's nothing that Trump has done that I agree with. It seems crazy. I can't remember a politician for whom I could say nothing he has done I agree with. Recently there was a bill that was passed through both houses of Congress to help veterans who've been scammed by certain colleges. You know, it's a miracle that it passes both houses of Congress. It was vetoed by the president. I shake my head. How can one not think that this is just all evil? Fortunately, I've been taught to stop and to think. To stop and to think, something I think we need more of. So let's be honest, I think that you would probably join me once in a while in your thoughts by having a thought like, oh, I wish Trump got COVID-19. Anybody just passively think that? Or how about, and this is worse, somebody's got to assassinate him. And of course, we wouldn't do that, but we have that dream. And then we stop and we think. And remember that, at least I don't think that way. I don't think that way. Truthfully, I have a fundamental philosophical disagreement with the belief that there is a division between those who are good and those who are evil. That philosophical assumption that I see in that is dualism. Those of you who were in the Sunday school class when we read Richard Rohr's book, Falling Upward, will remember the concept. But let me read some of Rohr's words on that to refresh your memory. The dualistic mind is essentially binary, either or thinking. It knows by comparison, opposition, and differentiation. It uses descriptive words like good and evil, pretty and ugly, smart and stupid. Dualistic thinking is our way of reading reality from the position of our private and small self. What's in it for me? This is the ego's preferred way of seeing reality. The dualistic mind cannot process things like infinity, mystery, God, grace, suffering, sexuality, death, or love. It pulls everything down into some kind of tit-for-tat, false choices, and too simple contraries. To see the world dualistically is to divide everything we see into yes or no, good or evil, and to do so absolutely. That is, when we divide something from something else or someone, good or evil, we do so absolutely. If somebody is good, they are absolutely good. And if they're evil, they are absolutely evil. Just watch Disney movies. The Lion King, Mufasa, and Scar. Scar's absolutely evil. Remember the scene with the Nazis in that movie? 101 Dalmatians. It took me a long time to understand what Cruella de Vil means. Aladdin, there's Jafar, and Snow White, there's the evil queen. Mulan, there's Shan Yu. All absolutely evil. Have our children unwittingly been indoctrinated into dualistic thinking? Is Disney partly to blame for how things are messed up? Bigger question. Is this the way of Jesus? Did he divide people into the good and the evil? I sometimes wonder what the gospel would be like if it was written by Disney. A different way to see reality is to see that all things are in relationship with each other, that all of us are constituted by our relationships, therefore we are all interdependent, with each other, and we cannot be divided. Consider, I have it here, hang on, the symbol. Do I know this symbol? Oh, I'm off. You get it yet? Hello. Can anyone see this? Probably not. Don't worry, all the techies are getting on it.
Jim, we can hear you just fine.
Huh?
We can hear you just fine, Jim.
Oh, you can hear me. Okay, so forget the symbol. I'll bring it back later. Basically, the symbol of the Tao says that there's a piece of every opposite that's in everything. So there is nothing that is absolutely anything. Evangelicals often refer to this way of seeing as relativism, and for them, that means anything goes. So if everything's relative, then nothing matters because there are no absolutes. There's no way to know the truth. They forget that only the Sith deal in absolutes. A book that turned into a movie entitled Little Children, written by Tom Perrotta, I think of it as an American parable. It starts with Sarah Pierce living in the suburb of Boston, very nice community. She's a stay-at-home mom, but she resents that she had to give up her career for her husband Richard. Then she discovers that her husband Richard is addicted to pornography, and she becomes dispirited about her marriage, and just about everything else. Brad is a stay-at-home dad, and he is supposed to be spending his time working on the bar exam, which he has failed twice, and he is not motivated. He's married to a beautiful woman, and he thinks about high school all the time. The two of them meet in the park one day, and convicted sex offender Ronnie McGorry, comes to the pool. All the parents take their children out of the pool. After that, it rains, and Brad and Sarah retreat to his house. They put the two children to bed, and an affair ensues. Did you get that far? Okay. All right. So Brad meets up with his friend, former policeman Larry, who left the police department after mistakenly shooting and killing a black boy at the mall who was holding a toy gun. Larry's wife has left him, and so Larry spends his time harassing Ronnie, the sex offender. One evening, Larry takes the bullhorn over to Ronnie's house and starts yelling at Ronnie, the sex offender. Ronnie's mother, May, comes out and asks him to leave, and she has a heart attack and dies. Meanwhile, Sarah and Brad decide that they're going to leave their spouses, and they plan to meet in the park. On the way to the park, Brad hangs out with some youth who are skateboarding, and he falls, hits his head, and blacks out and is taken to the hospital. Sarah goes to the park expecting to see Brad and run away with him, but the person who's there is Ronnie, the sex offender, who is grieving the loss of his mother. Sarah feels some sympathy, but she keeps her distance. Then Larry shows up at the park, feeling guilty about causing May's death. Larry sees Ronnie and approaches him to discover that he has castrated himself. Larry hurries him to the hospital, but there he dies. Sarah and Brad give up on their dream to run away together. It's not a family movie. I hope in this just brief explanation of this story, you can see the complexity of regarding good and evil. When anybody hears that a person is a sex offender, that's the worst thing you can be. And I believe we all want to say, he's evil. Worst possible thing. But did he decide to be attracted to children one day? It certainly is evil to act upon such feelings and hurt children, and we always have to protect our children. But does Ronnie deserve the death penalty for being a pedophile? Larry shot a black kid, something that's in the news a lot these days. Is he absolutely evil? Consider all the things in our culture that allowed him to shoot the gun. Because racism is systemic in our culture, and because we are interdependent with each other, it's not just Larry who shoots the gun, we all do. Kathy is beautiful. She's resentful for Brad having an affair with such a plain woman. That's petty. Evil. Brad's such a nice guy. He plays around with teenagers. Everybody in town loves him. He dreams about high school. He's not growing up. Is that evil? Or what about the addicted Richard, the husband, addicted to pornography? Is that absolutely evil? It may disgust us, but is he a demon? Has anybody been watching the news to see Mary Trump, who wrote the most recent book about the president? You're watching that? And I watched some of the interviews. Doesn't look good for the Don, does it? After one of the commentators, after Mary Trump said that the president made a very big mistake when, in his reaction to the virus. The commentator said, there's still time before the election. He can turn it around. It would be the best thing he could do. Mary Trump said, he's incapable of doing that. He would have to admit that he made a mistake. Narcissists can't do that. Is narcissism an illness? If so, can a narcissistic person control his behavior? Is it not also evil to elect a narcissist? Is ignorance evil? Part of the reason I believe we are in this mess is because of dualistic thinking, where we divide everything black and white, gay and straight. We're learning a lot about gender and sexual orientation as being fluid. That's relational thinking. We've been so dualistic in our thinking that masks and returning to school have become a yes or no thing. Whose side are you on? Are you with us or against us? Trump is dualistic thinking on steroids. His favorite Bible verse. Everybody know what it is? An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But Jesus actually said something about that. You can look it up in Matthew 5:38. Fortunately, the parable of the weeds is not the only thing that Matthew shared about Jesus. What about the Beatitudes? What about judge not that you be judged? Loving enemies flies straight in the face of dualistic thinking. That's why it makes so many people uncomfortable. When we think dualistically, we objectify people, and when we objectify people, we can dismiss them and cast them out. When we think relationally, we subjectify everything. So when we cast someone out, we are casting ourselves out also. Doesn't that sound a little more like what Jesus would say? We are all in this together, not because it's a good thing to think. We are all in this together because we really are all in this together. We say Black Lives Matter because Black people have been cast out. They have not been loved as they should be loved. And our sin is not to recognize that when we enslave them, we enslave ourselves. One can separate weeds from the wheat in a planted field, but you can't divide an ecosystem. I believe that Jesus viewed reality with this relational lens. He called viewing things like this love. Don't misunderstand me. I see evil in the world all over the place. Most of what Donald Trump does is not good, and I can even say that it is evil, but it's not that he is absolutely evil. We are still called to resist evil, injustice, and oppression in whatever forms they present themselves, but not from the lens of zero sum. The focus of our resistance does not reside in demonizing people, but more talking about the lenses that we use to see, the way we think, the assumptions and the judgments that we make, and our willful ignorance. Racism is evil. Dualistic thinking is evil partly because it's what leads to racism. We resist Donald Trump because all he sees are those who are for him and those who are against him. He's transposed loyalty from something that is good to something that is not. We resist this way of thinking in whatever forms it presents itself, including in ourselves. The worst thing that we can do is to be so upset with Donald Trump that we start thinking dualistically too and decide who are the evil people and who are not. Now, let's imagine, if you will, if Disney wrote the gospel. Jesus was born in a good but impoverished family in the hick town of Nazareth. Sorry, it is Nazareth. And he was supposed to be a carpenter just like his dad. But God spoke to him out of the cloud with the voice of James Earl Jones, calling him to save Israel from the evil King Herod and his slack-eyed, wily sidekick Caiaphas. Jesus gathers some disciples, but instead of 12, there are only 6. Otherwise, there would be too many toys for Happy Meals. Peter, who is called the Rock, joined by Jimmy, Andy, Phil, Tommy the Skeptic, and Judas the Snitch. The climax of the story would be in the upper room where they shared, Welch's grape juice and small squares of Wonder Bread. And Judas rats on Jesus. Jesus is caught and is crucified, but then the heavens split open and a lightning bolt hits the cross and Jesus pops off and you can see his powerful abs. Rocky KOs Herod. The disciples suddenly have ninja fighting skills. Caiaphas and Judas sneak off into the wilderness because you have to have them for the sequel. Everyone goes back to the Garden of Gethsemane and they have a picnic. I think Trump might like to read this gospel, don't you? But is it the gospel of Jesus Christ? The gospel of Jesus is not about absolute good and evil. Not even Judas was absolutely evil. The gospel of Jesus is about love for all, the oneness of all, the black kid and the cop, the pedophile and the narcissist, Mufasa and Scar, Democrat and Republican, gay and straight, you and me. In all our suffering, in all our sin, and in all our brokenness. Amen.